Hey guys, it's Rogowy here and we're doing another tutorial. Today we are looking at how to make our photos a little more dramatic by adding a few effects and just to spice it up a bit, make it a little more interesting. And we're starting with this image right here, which is kind of a typical prairie scene, one that we're pretty familiar with. And I just want to say before we get started that I take no credit for the photography itself. I'm just making the tutorial for educational purposes only. So let's get started. We're going to use image 7801. We're going to open that with Photoshop. Let's drag that down. And we're going to start by just tweaking the colors a little bit, making it a little more punchy, a little more, make the colors pop a little bit more. So what we're going to do is we're going to go Image, Adjustments, we're going to go Brightness and Contrast. And we're just going to pull up the contrast slider a bit to make those colors pop. And we're just going to tweak that brightness slider down a little bit. All right, that's going to make those colors a little bit more punchy. You see before and after. Next, what we're going to do, Command 0 so it fills the screen. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to selectively color and bring out some of the colors in the sky and in the wheat here or in the field and on the barns. So we're going to go Image, Adjustments, we're going to go Selective Color. We're going to start with the reds, which should affect mainly this barn and some of the grass here. So you can see what it's doing, and we're going to just really bring out those reds nicely to make, again, more dramatic colors in the scene. We're also going to go to yellows, which obviously is going to affect the yellows of the field. And you can see that we can really tweak it and change even the time of year to some degree by adjusting that. I'm going to go for a very saturated looking image. All right, we're going to adjust our greens, which is just going to affect that little bit of grass that's there. It's barely noticeable. So we're just going to tweak it a tiny bit. And the cyans, which should affect the sky, I'm going to tweak those. Just a tiny bit that it affects the sky. A little bit. Okay, actually the black slider seems to have changed it quite a bit, especially in the lower clouds here. Now the blue slider should change it a little bit more. And again, just minor. Thought it'd be a more dramatic change, but that's okay. All right, so we brought out a little bit more color there. Let's do the whites too. Now the whites should get the rest of the cloud area, and you can see that that's really affecting it good. So we can kind of tweak the feel of our image to some degree. And we're just going to go like that, and we're going to hit OK. So if I look at the before and after, whoops, not actions, history. Go before, there it is before, there it is after. You can see we've really pulled out a lot of color there. We've really made it punchy. We also want to pull out some details, so we're going to go Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask, and we're just going to pull that slider up. We don't want to go too much, but we do want to make it a little more punchy and a little more detail. So I'm bringing up my amount slider. You can see what it's doing. It's increasing the detail, and my radius slider, I got about 1.7. Again, this is just trial and error, finding what works for you, and hit OK. So let's look again what we started with and where we're at. Huge difference, dramatic. Now I probably went too far. It's probably oversaturated now. I could pull that down a little bit with hue and saturation, just a bit. But nah, I like it. It's cool. I like when you bring out more color in the scene than that was there originally. All right, so let's start with that. We're going to start by adding kind of a interest to the sky itself, and I know that this doesn't make any sense at all. It shouldn't happen, or it shouldn't work in real life, but for the sake of the tutorial, we're going to do it anyways. We're going to open up a file called Moon. This is what the file looks like. Let's open it up with Photoshop. And we've got a moon. We're going to move the moon over to the other file, drop it in, I'm going to press Command T, and I'm going to hold Shift. We're going to shrink the moon down so that it's about the size that a moon would be. Now, if we were going for a real cartoony look, we'd go huge, but we're not doing that. We're going for a little more realistic. Keep in mind, it's a cloudy day here, and there wouldn't be a moon noticeable on a cloudy day. But for the sake of the tutorial, let's just do it anyways. So maybe like that. Now, we got a black background. How are we going to get rid of it? Blending modes. Let's find one that works. I could try lighten. No, that doesn't look too good. Screen. That looks pretty good. You know what? Screen looks like it's going to be the one for this. And what I can do is just pull down my opacity so that it's not too noticeably fake. And we'll go filter, blur, Gaussian blur, a little bit of a blur on it so it's not super fake looking, even though we know it is. We're gonna hit OK. Again, Command T. We can rotate it a bit and maybe shrink it down a little bit in size. Again, this is personal preference. And there we go. Now we got this this moon in the sky. Maybe that's a little too big. It's okay. All right, the next thing we're going to do is it looks like there was just a storm that had passed through, so we're going to add a rainbow. Again, just for added effect, just for the sake of doing it. I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to call it Rainbow. And we're going to go to our gradient tool, which is this one right here. And from the gradient tool, we're going to load a gradient that is not there by default. And if it is here on this one, it's just because I loaded it before. No, it's not. We're going to go to this little pull down in the gradient window. So once again, just to show you where I went, gradient tool up at the top, pull this down, pull the little settings down, and we're going to load spectrums. And we're going to say append. Oop, that wasn't it. Sorry, special effects, append. That's the one. This is the one we're trying to get. It's called Russell's Rainbow. Click that. We're going to go with a radial gradient. Now the way that a radial gradient works, if you haven't used one before, is you have to imagine a giant circle. And what we're doing with this tool is we're actually drawing from the center of the circle and we are releasing it approximately where we want that gradient to go. I'll show you what I mean. So if I wanted a rainbow here and it's circular shaped, I have to try to imagine where the center of the circle is. So it's probably going to be somewhere about here. I'm going to drag, click and drag. I'm going to let go somewhere about here. And there's a rainbow. I don't like that. I'm going to undo, Command Z. I'm going to try it again, and I'm going to drag and drop it about there. Now, it doesn't look realistic, obviously, because we haven't done anything to it yet. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our eraser tool, or we can add a layer mask, which is probably the better way of doing it. Let's add a layer mask. Take a paintbrush and a black brush, and we're going to go, and I got some crazy brush on here. We're going to go and set it to black, set it nice and soft with a size about that big. And what we're going to do is we're just going to start by painting the bottom of that rainbow off the horizon, because that doesn't make any sense. You're not going to see a rainbow on the horizon. Okay. Next, it looks way too strong, so we're going to change the blending mode of this layer. You got to click this half of the layer right here. I'm going to change it to a different mode, something like overlay or soft light. Any of those are going to look pretty good. Let's go with overlay. We're going to pull down the opacity of that layer, just so it's kind of there. And you notice that the colors are way too, there's too harsh of a transition between the two. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a blur to it. We're going to go Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, And we're gonna soften up the edges of that rainbow a bit. All right, something like, whoa, too much. Something like that. All right, because a real rainbow is not, it's not super defined. It's more like just kind of there. We're gonna hit OK. Now what we might want to do is bring up our opacity a bit now, just to bring up the strength of that a little bit. And now you can see we have a somewhat realistic looking rainbow. All right, then the last thing we're going to do to this, we're going to add a vignette. We're going to add a new layer. We're going to call it Vignette. And we're going to go to Edit, Fill. We're going to fill it with black. We're going to set the opacity to 60% as a starting point. And we're going to add a layer mask. Next, we're going to take our brush. We're going to use a large brush. We're going to make sure our hardness is at 0, which it is. And this, I love doing this. We're going to paint the light in where we want it to go. So we're on the layer mask part of it. We're just going to click. We're not going to paint. We're just going to click randomly, almost, in areas where we want the light to show. All right, now if you think that that rainbow looks too fake, we can go in here and we can click to make that look a little more faded out at the top or even the bottom, just to make it look a little more realistic there as well. Okay, so again, it's experimenting and making it look as natural as possible. Again, obviously this doesn't really work because a couple things, like the fact that there's clouds and then there's a moon, and yeah, anyways. But if we look at our history, we see what we started with, which is a very plain image. It doesn't have a lot going on. It's still a great photo. You know, we really added some dramatic changes to it. Maybe a little bit too much, a little bit overboard, but it's still something to consider if you want to, you know, tweak a photo to make it a little bit more special. You can always use these type of methods in your own photos. Anyways, let's save it. We're gonna go save as. We're gonna call it, I'm just gonna call it desktop. We're gonna call it rainbow, I guess. Save. All right, so hopefully you got through that okay. Use these your own techniques to enhance your own images. And hopefully this was useful to you. Till next time, keep taking good photos.